Montana Territory, July 1872. The deal was made in the heat of noon, in the dust behind the saloon in Fort Benton, where flies clung to sweat and men bartered like they had the right to trade anything that breathed. "Heather goes with the horse," said a lamb Greaves, voice flat as gravel, thumb hooked in his belt. "Good teeth, rides strong, no limp. The mare, too." The man he spoke to, a rancher with a crooked eye and a thirst for whiskey, paused, then gave a slow nod. "You're serious," a lamb spat. "She ain't done me no good, better use to you." Heather Greaves stood 6 feet away, wrists bruised from earlier, hands clenched in her skirt. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply looked at the mare that was to be her price and then turned her face to the mountains. She was 23 and her husband had just sold her for a horse. The rancher reached for her arm. That was when a voice cut through the dust like a blade. "Let her go." A cowboy stepped out from the livery's shadow, his coat slung over one shoulder, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. He looked to be in his late 20s, sun-browned, lean, with the kind of stillness in him that made other men pause. His name was Hayes Judson, though few folks used it unless they meant to mean it. A lamb swiveled. "She ain't yours." "She ain't yours neither," Hayes said, stepping closer. "You cannot sell a woman like a mule. Let her go." "What are you gonna do?" a lamb sneered. "Buy her?" "No," Hayes said, staring straight through him. "I will take her, and you will walk away." The rancher raised his hands and backed off. "This is not my mess," a lamb laughed. "You think I care what she wants? She's mine," Heather finally spoke. "No, I am not." A lamb reached for her, but Hayes was already moving. The punch landed hard, right in a lamb's jaw, dropping him to the dirt. He groaned, spitting blood. Hayes stood over him, fists still tight. Heather looked at Hayes, her heart pounding like it had not done in years. He did not ask if she was all right. He just held out his hand. She took it. They rode out before sundown, heading north along the Missouri. Heather rode the mare. Hayes stayed quiet, giving her the space to breathe. He did not ask questions. He did not touch her. He just rode beside her like he had nowhere better to be. By the time the stars came out, they stopped near a creek. Hayes started a fire, then handed her a tin plate with beans and cornbread. Heather ate in silence. "You got a place to go?" Hayes finally asked. She shook her head slowly. "No family, no land, just me." He nodded once. "Then you stay with me till you do." She looked at him across the fire, her lashes wet but her face calm. "Why did you help me?" Hayes stirred the coals with a stick and shrugged. "Because someone should have." Heather swallowed hard. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." And that was that. The days that followed were quiet. Hayes had a small homestead south of Fort Benton, a one-room cabin, a half-built barn, and a few head of cattle. He let her stay, gave her the spare cot, showed her where the water was, how to feed the chickens, how to cut fence wire without slicing your hand open. Heather worked without complaint. She had grown up on dirt and hard bread. She knew how to survive. But there was something different here. Hayes never looked at her the way a lamb had. Never barked, never grabbed, never expected anything back. He just let her be, and slowly something loosened inside her. One morning she found him splitting wood by the barn. His shirt was off, sweat running down his back, arms taut with each swing. She watched from the porch, a cup of tin coffee warming her hands. "You gonna help or just stare?" he called without turning. Heather smiled, the first real one in a long time. "You never asked for help. You never needed permission." She set her cup down and walked to him, took another axe from the stump and lined up beside him. They worked side by side, sweat mixing with sawdust, the rhythm oddly comforting. When they finished, he handed her a rag. Their fingers touched. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. Neither of them moved. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "You hungry?" "Starved," she said, her voice soft, and they went inside. That night she lay on the cot and listened to the wind against the cabin walls. Hayes slept across the room, one arm over his eyes. She stared at the ceiling, heart too full to sleep. He had not asked for anything. Not a kiss, not a touch, not even a thank you. But she wanted to give him everything. 2 weeks passed. Then one evening after supper she brought him a tin of coffee and sat beside him on the porch. The air was cool, the horizon painted in gold and lavender. "I was not always like that," she said quietly, "before a lamb. I used to laugh more, I used to sing." Hayes looked at her, his gaze steady. "I believe that." She set her cup down. "He broke me?" "No," Hayes said, voice low. "He tried, but he failed." Heather blinked fast, breath catching, then without thinking she leaned her head against his shoulder. He stilled, then slowly rested his chin atop her hair. They sat that way until the stars came out, and for the first time in years Heather felt safe. The next morning, while gathering eggs, Heather spotted movement near the fence. 2 boys, maybe 6 and 8, dirty-faced and wide-eyed. They looked half-starved. Hayes came up behind her. "You know them?" She frowned. "No, but they need help." They approached slow. The older boy stepped in front of the younger. "We ain't stealing," he said, "just hungry." "What are your names?" Heather asked gently. "Perry," said the older. "This is Peter. Our ma died. Our pa never came back." Heather's heart broke clean in half. She looked at Hayes. He gave one nod. "We have food," Heather told them, "and a place to sleep." That night the cabin held 4 souls instead of 2. Heather tucked the boys in one cot. Hayes took the floor, and she sat at the table staring at the flickering lantern. "They need someone," she whispered. "So did you," Hayes said. She looked at him. "I still do." He stood then, slow and sure, and walked to her. "So do I." Heather rose from the chair, her hands trembling as she reached for him. He cupped her face gently, like she was something breakable he meant to protect. She kissed him first. He kissed her back like he had been waiting his whole life. And when they finally parted, foreheads pressed together, she whispered, "You gave me love without asking anything back." Hayes smiled, voice thick. "You gave it back anyway." They stood in the glow of the lantern, arms wrapped tight, and for the first time since that hot July day, Heather knew one thing for sure: she was never going to be sold again. She was already home. August brought dry heat and crickets, and the days stretched long over the grassland that rolled north of the river. Hayes had begun fencing the east pasture with cedar posts, and Heather worked alongside him, her hands roughening as the days passed. The boys helped when they could, gathering kindling or hauling water from the creek in buckets too big for their arms. They never complained, neither did she. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep curled up in the low trundle bed Hayes had built from old wagon boards, Heather stood at the window, watching the wind bend the tall grass. She didn't turn when Hayes stepped behind her. "They don't speak much about what happened," he said. "They don't have to," she answered. "It's in how they eat, how they flinch when the door opens too fast." Hayes was quiet for a time, then asked, "You ever think about leaving this place?" She turned. "Leave it for what? I don't know, back east, or somewhere new. Someplace you ain't got to work so hard." "I don't mind working hard." She folded her arms, leaning against the frame. "I mind doing it for someone who sees me as less than a person." He met her eyes. "You're not less than anything." She didn't look away. "Neither are you." He stepped forward, close enough she could feel the warmth off his chest. "I ain't good at saying things." "I don't need you to say anything," she said, voice low. "Just don't run when things get hard." "I never have." She nodded once, then brushed past him to check the stove, the closeness lingering like heat in her chest. The next morning, while Heather was tending to the goats, a wagon rolled up the trail, its wheels groaning under the weight of canvas and crates. A woman sat on the bench seat, reins in hand, bonnet tied firm. She looked to be in her 40s, jaw set, a rifle strapped along the side. Heather wiped her hands. "Can I help you?" The woman climbed down, dusting her skirt. "Name's Ruth Castor. I heard rumor from the postmaster there was a man out here taking in strays. Thought I'd meet him." Hayes emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his fingers. "I don't take in strays." The woman looked between them. "You do now." She lifted the canvas flap and helped down a girl with thick braids and eyes like wet stone. "This is Clara. Her brother went missing last winter. Her uncle tried to marry her after." "We left." Heather stepped forward and took the girl's hand. "You're safe here," Ruth nodded. That's all I needed to hear. She turned back to the wagon. I'll keep heading west, Idaho maybe. You sure you want to be out alone? Hayes asked. I've been alone longer than you've been alive, son. She offered a brief smile and climbed back up. Take care of her. The wagon creaked down the trail and vanished beyond the cottonwoods. Clara stood silent, shoulders high, eyes darting like a cornered animal. You like goats? Heather asked. Clara shrugged. Good, she said. They need someone to brush them. That night, while Hayes sat on the porch sharpening a blade, Heather brought out 2 mugs, one for each of them, brewed with bark and mint she'd gathered that morning. She's scared, Heather said, handing him one. She'll settle, so did you. Heather sat on the step beside him. I still have nights I wake up and don't know where I am. I know, she sipped the tea, letting it burn its way down. I'll never understand how you knew to step in that day. You didn't even know me. Hayes didn't look over. I knew what he was doing. That was enough. And now, he turned his head toward her, now I know you and I'd still do it again. She rested her hand on his knee, fingers light. I'd never let anyone trade me again, not for a horse. Not for anything. He covered her hand with his rough palm warm. No one's going to try. The stars spilled across the sky like freckles and the quiet wrapped around them like a blanket. Inside, the children breathed steady. Outside, the world held still. Heather leaned her head against him, not because she needed comfort, but because she chose to. That was the difference now. Everything she did, every word, every touch, it was her decision, and Hayes never asked her to be anyone else. By early September, the cottonwoods along the creek had begun to yellow at their edges, and the air held a faint sharpness in the mornings that hinted at the coming shift. The cattle grew restless in the evenings, lowing more often, and birds moved in tighter patterns overhead. Heather rose before the light to bake bread and boil water, her sleeves rolled past her elbows, hair braided close to her scalp to keep it from the heat of the stove. Clara helped without being asked, quiet but steady, her eyes less guarded now. Hayes had taken to riding out before breakfast, checking on a neighbor's heifers that had been grazing too close to the tree line. He returned one morning with a gash below his ribs from a loose barbed wire. Heather saw the stain before he reached the porch. You should have tied it off, she said, stripping her apron and reaching for the basin. Didn't notice till I was halfway back. She poured water over the wound, her fingers working steadily. You noticed. You just didn't want to lose the daylight. He winced as the cloth touched raw skin. You're starting to sound like someone who thinks she can tell me what to do. I don't think, I know. She scrubbed the blood away, then pressed a folded strip of linen against the tear. Hold that, he obeyed, jaw tight. You'll need stitches. He looked down at her, his voice even. You done that before, on my brother. He fell on a pitchfork when we were small. She threaded the needle without hesitation and worked in silence, the fire crackling low behind them. When she finished, she tied the last knot and leaned back. Hayes exhaled slow. You could have been a doctor. I could have been a lot of things, she said, rinsing the needle, but I'm here. He sat up straighter. You regret that? No, she handed him a clean shirt. But I do sometimes wonder what might have happened if I'd been allowed to choose sooner. He pulled the shirt over his head, careful not to strain the stitches. You're choosing now? I am. She looked at him, eyes steady. And I choose you. The weight of the words hung between them, solid and sure. Hayes didn't reach for her, didn't lean in. He just nodded once, like something inside him had settled into place. The next week brought frost one morning, thin and pale on the porch rail. Clara and the boys stood staring at it, breath clouding the air. Heather wrapped scarves around their necks before sending them to gather wood. Hayes came in from the barn with a narrow box in his hands. He set it on the table and looked to Heather. I found this in the back loft. Belonged to my mother. Inside was a length of faded blue calico, a brass brooch shaped like a swallow, and a small book of pressed herbs wrapped in waxed linen. Heather touched the cloth with reverent fingers. She kept this. She used to sew at night. Said the sound of the needle was quieter than thinking. Heather smiled faintly. I understand that. I thought maybe Clara could use the cloth, or she'll sew better if someone shows her how. Heather folded the fabric carefully. And I have a girl now. I might as well teach her. They spent the afternoon at the table, Heather showing Clara how to line a hem and keep the thread smooth. Hayes watched from the doorway, arms crossed loosely, the sun warming his back. That night, Heather lit only one lantern. The children were already asleep and the wind outside had gone still. She sat on the edge of Hayes's bed, her hands resting lightly in her lap. "You never asked me what a lamb took from me," she said, her voice low. Hayes didn't move. "You don't owe me that. I know. But I want you to hear it." She looked up then, meeting his eyes. "He took my music. I used to sing when no one was listening. After a while, I forgot how." Hayes reached over, not to touch her, but to hand her the old herb book from his mother's box. "Then maybe it's time you remembered." She opened it slowly. Between the pages, pressed flat, were meadow flowers and prairie grass, each labeled in tidy cursive. She traced one stem with her thumb. "I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again," she said. "You don't have to be whole," Hayes said quietly. "You just have to be here." She set the book down and leaned into him, resting her forehead against his. "I want a life with you." "You have it," he said, voice thick. "Whatever this is, it's yours too." They stayed that way for a long time, neither speaking, hearts steady. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing the cabin walls like a lullaby. Inside, Heather finally exhaled and let herself believe it. Not just the safety, not just the quiet. But the love, the kind that didn't ask, didn't press, didn't break. The kind that stayed. The first snow came early that year, quiet and thin, brushing the ground in a dusting that didn't stick but made the air taste like iron and pine. Heather stepped outside with a wool shawl tight around her shoulders, watching the frost catch on the fence rails. The chickens stayed close to their shed, clucking low and unsettled. Behind her, Hayes finished latching the cabin door against the cold. "We'll need to cut more wood." "What we've got won't last till December," Heather nodded. "I'll take the boys to gather dry limbs by the ravine. You'll get more done without them underfoot." "They like being underfoot." She tightened the shawl. "I know." He touched her elbow before she turned. "Don't go past the bluff." "We won't." By midday, she had the boys loading kindling into old flour sacks while she pried loose a fallen branch wedged between two rocks. The air smelled like wet bark and moss, and Peter's laughter rang sharp when Perry slipped in the mud. As she reached for another limb, Clara appeared from behind a split tree trunk, red-cheeked and silent, dragging a bundle of dry pine needles in her skirt. "You didn't have to follow," Heather said. Clara kept her eyes low. "I wanted to." Heather took the bundle. "You remember anything about your mother?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "She used to boil pine gum when I was sick, said it cleared the chest." Heather brushed a stray lock of hair from the girl's forehead. "We'll try that next time you cough." When they returned, Hayes was stacking the last of the chopped wood against the cabin wall. His left hand was wrapped in a cloth, darkened with a stain near the base of his thumb. Heather took one look and said, "What did you do, Miss the Grain?" Axe glanced. "Let me see." He held it out without protest. The gash was clean but deep. She led him inside and poured water into a basin, setting it on the stove to warm. As she cleaned the wound, he watched her with a quiet steadiness. "You always knew how to fix things?" "No," she said. "I learned because no one else would." His voice came low. "That's not your burden to carry anymore." She paused. "You say that like I know how to lay it down." "You will." Later, after the children had gone to sleep, Heather returned from the barn with a folded oilcloth bundle. She laid it on the table in front of Hayes, who was sharpening a drawknife by lantern light. "What's this?" he asked. "My father's ledger. Found it in the root cellar yesterday, under the old churn. He used to keep track of everything: seed, debts, rainfall. I thought maybe we could do the same." Hayes opened it carefully. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded in places, but the neat columns and scrawled notes still ran clean across the page. "You want to run this place like a farm." "I want it to be more than just surviving." He set the drawknife down. "Then we'll make it into that." She pulled a chair beside him. "We'll need to fence the west slope come spring." It's soft ground, but we can run squash and beans once it warms. He nodded slowly. And a root cellar that won't flood. We'll mark it. She leaned in, her shoulder brushing his. Do you ever think about what it'll be like in 10 years? He looked at her, his voice quiet. You mean with you still here? I mean with all of us still here, growing into this. His hand found hers, fingers warm and certain. Then I think it'll be good. Winter settled in slow. Snow came in short, hard flurries, leaving the ground patchy and hard. The children took to carving figures from scrap wood, and Clara began humming when she thought no one was listening. Heather heard it once while mending by the fire and didn't interrupt. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters and the fire burned low, Hayes reached under the cot and brought out a long, narrow tin wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Heather. She opened it to find a length of polished walnut, carved and fitted with a single-string fiddle bow. I started it before I met you, he said. Didn't know what I was making it for. She ran her fingers along the grain. I haven't played since I was a girl. He sat beside her. Then you're long overdue. She raised it slowly, adjusting her fingers along the neck and drew the bow across. The sound was thin, uncertain, but it held. She played a slow tune, one her mother used to sing when the days shortened and the geese flew low. Hayes didn't move, just watched her with a look she hadn't seen from anyone before, pride without possession. When the final note faded, Heather lowered the bow. Thank you, you don't owe me thanks. She turned to him in the warm hush of the room. Then I'll just say I love you. He touched her cheek, his thumb rough, his voice thick. I love you too, and nothing more needed saying. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the cabin held warmth and light, and the quiet shape of a life being built, slowly and without apology. The thaw came slow. Ice loosened from the eaves in long sighs, and the creek behind the barn began to run again, sluggish but certain. By the second week of March, the first green shoots pressed up through the soil near the split-rail fence, small and stubborn and bright as hope. Hayes carried the last of the firewood from the shed to the cabin wall, the limp in his stride more noticeable after a full winter of hard work. Heather watched from the porch, her sewing in her lap paused, needle half-threaded. You're favoring that leg, she said without looking up. He set the logs down, brushing his hands on his trousers. It's the cold. Makes every old break remember itself. Heather tied off her thread, folded the muslin square, and stood. You ever tell me how it happened? Wasn't worth the telling, I'm asking now. He leaned against the post, arms crossed. Spring drive, 5 years back, young bulls spooked near the coulee. I caught the wrong edge of the gully on the way down. Did you ride it out? Didn't have much choice. She nodded. I'll mix a poultice tonight, birch bark and vinegar. It'll ease the ache. He met her gaze. You always looking to fix things? I like what I hold to stay in good shape. Inside, Clara was kneeling by the hearth with Peter beside her, both watching a line of ants trail across the warm stones. Perry was on the floor with a slate, drawing out rows of letters under the dim light from the window. Heather bent to check the bread she'd set to rise, brushing flour from her palms. Perry, she said, you finish that page and I'll show you how to make a planting chart. Do we get seeds this year? He asked. We do, Hayes replied from the door. Traded for them at the Grange meeting in town. What kind? Clara asked, not lifting her head. Corn, squash. Some early greens. Heather turned. Did you speak to anyone while you were there? Hayes pulled the chair out and sat. A couple from Wolf Creek lost their barn to snow. They're rebuilding. Said they had spare hands if we need help with the south fence. She nodded. We could use the help. Man named Barker asked after you. Said he'd seen you once at a fair years back. Heather stiffened. My father sold leather goods. We used to set up a stall near the mill yard. He remembered your singing. She didn't answer right away. Then, my voice isn't what it was. Didn't say it had to be. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Heather stood by the back window with a folded scrap of sheet music in her hands. Hayes was at the table, oiling the hinges on the tool chest. Do you think people can start over without cutting away who they were? She asked. He didn't look up. I think the good stays, the rest just gets quieter. She turned. I want to make something that lasts. You already are. She crossed the floor to him, laid the page beside the oilcloth. Then let's put it in writing. He looked at the sheet, her mother's name in the corner, the ink faded but still legible. I want to teach them, she said. Not just the children here, others. There are girls who will never learn a note if someone doesn't show them. We'll clear the loft. You'll have your space. She knelt beside him. And you, I'll keep the land. And us, he took her hand, holding it like something fragile that had learned to weather storms. That's the part I'll never let go of. By mid-April, the garden rows were marked, and Clara had sewn a line of calico triangles to string across the porch beam. The children took turns carrying water, and Hayes built a second coop for the hens they'd received in trade. One morning, Heather walked the edge of the field with a folded note in her apron, an invitation from the schoolhouse in town, asking if she'd travel in to teach a short series on reading music. She brought it to Hayes after supper. You want to go? He asked. I want to come back, he nodded once. Then I'll ride in with you, bring the wagon. They left before dawn the next day, Hayes driving steady over the rutted road, Heather beside him with her hands clasped in her lap. At the schoolhouse, a line of children waited, each with a battered hymn book or nothing at all. She spent the morning teaching them the shape of sound, the way a breath could become a note a feeling, a truth. Hayes waited outside, watching the horses, his coat shrugged against the breeze. When she returned, he stood and offered her the reins. I'm yours, she said, taking them. They rode home under a sky just beginning to turn gold, the land wide and open around them. That summer, the cabin grew by one room. Hayes built it himself, with Perry holding the square and Peter fetching nails. Clara painted the shutters once it was done, careful and slow. Heather filled the shelves with books and bound notebooks. Ink jars tucked neatly beside the fiddle Hayes had made her. On the first truly warm night of June, they took supper outside. The children chased fireflies near the tree line while Hayes poured water into tin cups. Heather leaned back against his shoulder, her hair loose, her face turned to the stars. You ever wonder what your mother would say if she saw you now? He asked. She'd say I finally stopped waiting for someone to save me. And your father, she smiled faintly. He'd be proud I built something better than he ever could. Hayes traced her knuckles with his thumb. You're the strongest person I've ever known. She looked at him, eyes steady. You never needed someone soft. You needed someone who could carry the same weight. I don't want soft, he said. I want you. The wind moved through the tall grass, the fireflies flickered, and the night deepened around them like a promise that would never be broken. They married in August. No preacher, no paper. Just a circle of hands, the children standing close. Hayes tying a ribbon around Heather's wrist with the same knot he used on his saddle, a knot that held, no matter the strain. They planted new rows that fall, and when winter came again, it found a family stronger than it had before, woven not by blood, but by choice and care, and the unshakable bond between two people who had found each other when they thought all chances had gone. And in a cabin lit by firelight and song, in the heart of the Montana land that had once only offered survival, love took root so deep it would never come loose.